Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube. So today's video is going to be a sculpting video, and I'm sculpting a smaller sized hyena head for a hyena commission. So it is one of my smaller dolls. I usually go way too big with my dolls, but the commissioner wanted something a bit smaller. That's what I'm doing. So I'm using a aluminium ball like a core, and that acts as kind of like a skull for the polymer clay. And the polymer clay that I'm using is Sculpting Original. I like to work with the Sculpting Original because it is a lot softer, and I quite like working with soft clays. But if you like working with harder clays, you can use something like Super Sculpey or Sculpey Firm. So this is pretty soft to work with, and it enables me to work quickly because I like to sculpt quickly. But basically what I'm doing is covering the aluminium ball foil ball with the Sculpey, and I'm sort of mapping out a really rough shape of the head. I always have reference images off to the side, so I'm just comparing the size differences. What I usually do is look for some images on Google with different views of what I'm sculpting, so a side view or a front view, and then I have them in Photoshop next to me, and I blow them up to the size that I actually want, so I can compare all of the proportions to the images that I have, and just so I make sure that all of the way things are sculpted are similar to that reference images, because it's very easy to sculpt something and for it to look like something else. There's very subtle differences in mammals, and well, all animals to begin with, but there's very subtle differences in their face structure, and getting that right is really important for it to actually look like what you're sculpting. So I'm spending a bit of time just making sure I'm getting those proportions right and the way the head is structured right. For the nose, I basically just roll a little ball and cut the end of it off and have it in a really rough shape of the nose, and then once I put it on top of the snout, I can sort of sculpt it around a little bit and make sure that it's the right shape, always referring back to my reference images. Noses are a little difficult to sculpt because they're very similar, but there's like really subtle differences that you need to get correct to make it look like the nose from an animal that you're sculpting. So hyenas have a little bit of a different nose to a wolf, but it's very, very similar. There's just really slight differences that you need to be aware of when you're sculpting. So moving on to the lower jaw, and I had a couple of goes at the jaw because it wasn't really sitting the way I wanted it to, and the top of the muzzle had to come down a little bit for the jaw to actually sit like a hyena jaw. They've got a very specific look to their jaws. It looks very powerful, and it's a bit more square than a wolf jaw or a fox jaw. So I spent a bit of time getting that jaw correct, and the way the lips sit as well over that jaw. So I'm using my needle tool to create the little lip area and just carve out how I want the mouth to sit. So hyenas' mouths tend to just be a little bit straighter than the rest of them. Wolf mouths kind of go up a little bit at the end. So it's just really little things that you need to really take notice of and study a little bit more when you're sculpting animals. For the eye areas, I basically carve out like a little eye socket, if that makes sense, and just something that I can place those eyes on top of. So I put on little bits of clay and sort of press it in to create that eye socket, and then use my little scrapey tool to carve out that little area at the edge of the eyes to make it a little eye sockety. And I'm using glass cabochon eyes for this sculpt. I have an eye video over on my Patreon where I go into details of all the types of eyes that I use. So if you want to know a little bit more, head over there and you can find that video. But once the eyes are on, you want to really make sure they're symmetrical and they're sitting on the right angle. So sometimes when you're applying these eyes, they can be off on a different angle, and it just really makes it a little bit more, I guess, disproportioned. So you want to have a look at all the different views from where you can see the eye to make sure everything is symmetrical and they're actually lined up properly. So once you're happy with the way it's lined up, what I normally do to create the eyelids is roll out a little worm, and that basically creates like a little eyelid, which you can then add a little bit more detail. So you can see the expression has changed a lot just by adding that little bit of eyelid onto the glass cabochon. So it's starting to look more like in character and not a skull with eyes. So I'm going in with my little needle tool and just creating all those little details that come from around the eye socket. So really feathering out that the thicker eyelid, and creating some little detailing of fur around the eyes, leaving that really thin waterline. Same deal with the other side. But that's where it gets a little bit difficult because you need to have it symmetrical with the other side. It doesn't need to be 100% symmetrical because not everyone's faces or every animal's face is symmetrical. So there's a little bit of forgiveness there when it comes to the both sides, but you do want them to look relatively the same with the detailing and the placement. So once I'm happy with the placement, I can start building up on those extra eyelids using bigger pieces of Sculpey. And this is why I like using softer Sculpey, because I can just plop it on top and sort of blend it out into the areas that need a little bit more clay. So basically this is just doing a little bit more refining, adding little bits of clay to areas that I think need to be built up, or taking clay away from areas that I think there's a bit too much clay. And I like to add a little bit of detailing of the fur just so I can gauge what it will look like once it's finished. And I think it kind of makes the process come along a little bit better and blends in those pieces that you've just added. So I like to add a little bit of detailing, even though it's going to be covered with faux fur. For the ears, you can see it sort of just looks like, you can see how much ears make a difference when you put it on a sculpture. So as it's sculpted without the ears, you don't really know exactly what it is, but as soon as you put ears on, you can really tell what type of animal you're sculpting. So as soon as I put this first one on, you could tell that it was starting to look like a hyena, and that's basically because of the shape of the ears. Animals have, like, from what I've sculpted, I've learned there's a lot of different subtleties to ears, especially between like wolves and foxes. That's very similar, but there's little subtle differences and placements that make it look like the animal. So with the hyena, they have very specific looking ears where it's sort of rounded, pointed down the bottom and pointed up the top. So I haven't really come across another animal that's exactly the same as hyena ears. So that way it really highlights what type of animal you're sculpting and makes it actually look like the hyena. So again, the placement is always important, so you want to make sure that you're putting it symmetrically on the head. It doesn't have to be exactly symmetrical, like I said, with the eyes, but you do want it roughly in the same position as the other ear. Otherwise it ends up looking a little bit lopsided, so you definitely want to make sure you're placing it and look at it at different angles. So for the rest of the sculpture, it's really just refining the process and fixing up any little bits that need to be fixed up and adding any little details that need to be added. And then that way you can pop it into the oven and cure it and then put your doll together. So I'll be having a sculpting the feet video over on my Patreon. So you can check out how I sculpted all of the feet for this hyena. So it should be up. I'm planning to put it up at the same time as this video. But if it's not, it will definitely be up in the next couple of days. But check it out. I have heaps of tutorials over on my Patreon if you're interested in something like that. I also are doing a new series on where I talk about each doll that I'm making. I talk about like all the steps of the process and just a little bit of progress throughout the whole process. And so you can get a little bit more information about how I create my dolls that you wouldn't normally see on my YouTube channels. But that's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see more. Don't forget to share it. It helps me a lot. And it's also free. If not, you can check me out on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Creatures and Nat, and my shop, creaturesandnat.com. And I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.